Our story begins in the Byzantine Empire, when Saint Theodora was the empress. When her son Michael turned 15, she decided that it was time to find him a suitable maiden to be his wife. The empress dispatched imperial representatives to the various provinces across the empire to find a beautiful young woman. They were looking for a virtuous woman from a distinguished, pious family. Saint Irene was born into a noble, wealthy family. She was very pious and was the most beautiful woman in all of Cappadocia. When the imperial representatives came to Cappadocia, they all agreed that Saint Irene would make an excellent empress. Her family was ecstatic that Saint Irene was chosen to be one of the contestants in the bride show, and the imperial representatives escorted the saint to Constantinople. While they were traveling westward, she asked to halt the journey to receive a blessing from a holy monk who lived nearby. This holy monk was Saint Ioannikios, who had the gift of foresight and already knew that they would be coming that day. During their visit, he told Saint Irene that she would find joy in the convent of Chrysovalantou and prophesied that she would shepherd the virgins there. Saint Irene marveled at the clairvoyance of Saint Ioannikios. He knew her future and her name, even though she had not told him what her name was. When Saint Irene and her entourage arrived in Constantinople, they were told that Michael had already married another woman a few days earlier. Instead of being sad or angry, Saint Irene praised and thanked God. She was now free to enter the convent. However, her beauty had caught the eye of many wealthy men and government officials in the city. She was getting marriage proposals left and right, but Saint Irene desired the heavenly bridegroom and turned down all of the marriage proposals. She was determined to become a nun. She distributed all of her belongings among the poor. She gave away rich garments, gold ornaments, jewelry from her parents, and the valuable items that Saint Theodora had gifted her. Saint Irene then freed all her servants and slaves and hastened to the convent. Even though she came from a wealthy, noble family, Saint Irene became known for her great humility. She never complained about her work and obediences that she was given at the convent. All the nuns loved and revered her. Saint Irene was tireless in physical work, but more so in spiritual labors. She also was never absent from the divine services. In her cell, Irene would read the lives of the saints, so that she could emulate their lives and encourage the other nuns to do the same. One day, as she was reading the life of Saint Arsenios the Great, she read that he would pray from evening until morning, inflamed with zeal for this marvelous practice that imitated the angels. Saint Irene asked her abbess for a blessing to undertake this difficult struggle. The abbess hesitated to give her permission at first, but saw Saint Irene's eagerness and humility. After she received a blessing to undertake this superhuman and painful monastic practice, she started to stand from evening until morning with her hands lifted in prayer. When the abbess of the convent was on her deathbed, she told the nuns gathered round her that a wiser, holier woman was going to become their next abbess. That woman she spoke of was Saint Irene, who was not present to hear the abbess's final words concerning her. Saint Methodios, who was the patriarch of Constantinople, asked the nuns who they wanted to become their new abbess. After they told him that they didn't have a preference, he revealed to them that he already knew that they truly desired for their virtuous Saint Irene to become the new abbess. The nuns were shocked that Saint Methodios knew their thoughts, and he made Saint Irene the new abbess of the convent. Saint Irene had the gift of clairvoyance. She heard each nun's confession, and if a nun did not confess a certain sin she had committed, Saint Irene would tell the nun her sin. It was her sincere desire to help her nuns get to heaven, and she cared for each of her nuns as a mother would her children. The nuns respected and loved their abbess. Saint Irene's fame soon spread far and wide, and all who learned of her hastened to the convent. Many people converted and repented of their sins after meeting the saint and hearing her words of spiritual wisdom. Saint Irene continued to pray long hours with her arms outstretched to heaven. This practice really annoyed the demons. One night, the demons assembled in her cell. As Saint Irene was praying, with her hands uplifted, some of the demons let out terrifying yells. The demons were attempting to hinder her prayer, but they were unsuccessful. The demons started to mock her, but the holy abbess continued to stand and pray without even flinching. Then a demon lit a candle from the oil lamp and set fire to the saint's clothing. The flames consumed her robes and scorched her skin. One of the nuns, who happened to be awake and praying in her cell, started to smell burning flesh and clothing and ran to St. Irene's cell. Upon entering, she saw a strange sight. St. Irene was completely enveloped in flames, but she was still praying with her arms outstretched. Immediately, the nun began to extinguish the flames. St. Irene then lowered her arms. She told the nun that she was disappointed that she had put out the flames because a holy angel was holding a crown of fragrant flowers and was going to place it on her head. But the angel vanished when the nun came in and put the fire out. After this took place, the convent was filled with a heavenly fragrance for several days, and in just a few days, St. Irene's burned body was miraculously healed. One evening, one of the nuns was quietly walking outside of St. Irene's cell. She saw the abbess praying, but St. Irene's feet were 3 feet above the ground. Near the saint were 2 towering cypress trees. The trees were bent so that the tops of the trees touched the earth. The cypress trees remained in that position as long as the saint prayed. The trees appeared to be bowing to St. Irene. When St. Irene finished her prayer, she went over to the 2 cypress trees and made the sign of the cross over them. Only then did the trees resume their normal position. The nun believed that she had just witnessed a miracle, but decided not to tell anyone of what she had seen. Instead, a few days later, when St. Irene was praying, she decided to secretly tie 2 scarves to the tops of the trees while they were bent. When the other nuns at the convent saw the scarves tied to the tops of the trees the next day, they asked each other, who could have possibly hung the scarves that high? The nun who had tied the scarves revealed to them the miracle she had seen. They marveled at the story, but got angry at the nun for not waking them up so they could have witnessed the remarkable sight also. When St. Irene learned that the nun who had seen her had told the other nuns at the convent, she became upset. She was very humble and didn't want others to know about this miracle because she might become proud. She told the nun that she shouldn't have revealed the miracle to the other nuns. The nun then fell to the ground in fear and begged for her forgiveness. St. Irene told her and the rest of the sisterhood not to tell the miracle to anyone as long as she was still alive. Another miracle took place which involved a noble woman from Cappadocia. She was engaged to be married, but changed her mind. She didn't want to marry her fiancé and ran away to become a nun at the convent of Chrysovalantou. This greatly angered the abandoned fiancé. He decided to pay an evil sorcerer to cast a spell on the nun so she would leave the convent and marry him. The sorcerer called on the demons to help him cast the spell, and the nun lost her mind. She went all around the convent, screaming and crying. She even threatened to become violent. When St. Irene heard this, she wept. She then assembled all the sisterhood. She exhorted them to guard themselves against the schemes of the devil and ordered that all fast for the entire week and pray to God. She told each of the nuns to make 1,000 prostrations daily on behalf of their afflicted sister. On the 3rd night, St. Irene had a vision. She saw St. Basil the Great, who told her to take the sick nun to the church of the Theotokos at Vlacherne. She did as she was told, and took the sick nun to the church with some of the other nuns at the convent. They prayed all day with tears. After hours and hours of praying, they fell asleep. In her sleep, the holy abbess saw the Mother of God. Overcome with fear and trembling, St. Irene fell before the feet of the Theotokos. She heard the Theotokos call St. Basil, who told the Theotokos about the sick nun. Then the Theotokos called St. Anastasia, the great martyr. The Mother of God told St. Basil and St. Anastasia that Christ had given his blessings for them to go to Cappadocia to see what had happened and to heal the sick nun. St. Basil and St. Anastasia venerated the Theotokos and quickly departed to do as they were told. Then St. Irene heard a voice that told her to go back to the convent, and there the nun would be healed. When the saint woke from her sleep, she revealed the vision to the other nuns, and they left the church rejoicing. When they arrived at the convent, all of the nuns gathered in the church. St. Irene told all of them to raise their hands and eyes to heaven in prayer. After a long while, the floor of the church was soaked by their tears. Then they saw St. Basil and St. Anastasia flying in the air above them. St. Basil handed St. Irene a package. String, pieces of hair, horrific lead statues of 2 people, and demonic names written on a piece of paper were some of the objects in the package that the evil sorcerer had used to cast the spell. All the nuns stayed in the church for the rest of the night, praying and thanking God. Saint Irene sent 2 nuns and the sick nun back to Vlacherne. After divine liturgy, the next morning, the suffering nun was anointed with holy oil. After this, the objects of magic were cast into the fire. As they went up in flames, shrieks and pig squeals were heard from all gathered round, and the demons who were tormenting the sick nun departed. She came to her senses and glorified God who had redeemed her. Another miracle took place, which involved Saint Irene's relative. Her relative was a nobleman who was falsely accused of plotting to murder the emperor and was going to be put to death. Saint Irene's relatives went to her to ask for prayers for the nobleman to be spared. She consoled them and told them not to worry and that Christ would help. Then Saint Irene went to her cell and prayed on behalf of the wronged man. It was midnight, and the emperor was fast asleep when he saw Saint Irene in a dream. With a frightening, loud voice, she told the emperor that the nobleman had been slandered and to arise and release him immediately. She warned him that if he didn't do as she said, he would not live for very long. The emperor was outraged and yelled at her. He was angry that she dared to threaten him and was wondering how she had gotten into his room. She told him that her name was Irene and that she was the abbess of Chrysovalantou. Then she struck him on his side. The emperor woke up from his sleep, in pain and absolutely furious. He was shocked when he looked up and saw Saint Irene standing right in front of him. Then she went to the door and left. The emperor was terrified and shouted for his servants and his guard, who always stood outside his room every night. When they arrived, he asked them if they had seen the nun who had entered his room. The servants and guard were very confused because they hadn't seen anyone enter or leave his room. The guard swore that all of the doors were locked and that the keys were in his room. In the morning, the emperor commanded that the nobleman be brought to him. He asked the nobleman if he knew the abbess of Chrysovalantou. He told the emperor that she was his relative. However, even after this, the emperor still didn't release the nobleman. Instead, he sent his men and famous painters to visit the convent to paint a portrait of Saint Irene so he could be sure that he had actually seen Saint Irene in his room. Saint Irene, by the grace of the Holy Spirit, knew that the emperor's men were going to be coming to the convent and told the nuns not to be frightened when they came. When the emperor's men entered the convent, they bowed to Saint Irene, and as they came closer, they saw that she was glowing. The men were shocked and fell backwards. The saint helped them up and told them not to be afraid and that she was a sinner also. She told the men to tell the emperor to free her relative from prison, and if the emperor didn't, then his days on this earth would be numbered. When the men heard this, they were even more terrified. They agreed to tell the emperor and asked her if she could talk to them about how they could improve their spiritual lives. They did this so the painter would have enough time to paint Saint Irene while she was talking. The men returned to the palace and told the emperor what Saint Irene had said and presented the portrait. While they were showing the emperor the portrait, a brilliant light started shooting out from the image. The light beamed directly into the emperor's eyes, and he lost his eyesight. The blinded emperor trembled and cried out in fear to Christ to have mercy on him. His vision was restored, and he was able to see the portrait of the same nun whom he had seen in his room. At once, he ordered for the nobleman to be released. The nobleman thanked God for saving him from an unjust death, and the emperor asked the nobleman for his forgiveness. The emperor was relieved that he was prevented from committing an unjust execution, and that he was also delivered from the torments that Saint Irene alluded to. The emperor decided to write a letter to Saint Irene. He apologized for not believing her at first, and asked her to keep him and his wife in her prayers. Far away on the island of Patmos, a ship started to set sail for Constantinople when a white-bearded, elderly man on the shore started shouting and waving at the sailors to stop the ship. But there was a strong wind, and the ship was already too far from the harbor to turn around. The elder shouted to the sailors to at least halt the ship. The sailors did as he asked. To their astonishment, the elder stepped onto the water. walked straight to the ship and got on board. He went to the captain of the ship and gave him 3 fragrant apples. The man told the captain that the apples were from paradise and to give Christ's gift to Saint Methodios. Then he gave the captain another 3 apples that were equally as fragrant. He told him that these apples were a gift from Christ to Saint Irene. The man said that he was John from paradise, and then vanished. The captain was dumbfounded. He was just told to deliver apples from paradise by the holy apostle John. The captain did as he was told and delivered the apples to the saints. When he told Saint Irene the story of how he got the apples, her eyes filled with tears of joy and gratitude. She fasted for a week and prayed day and night, thanking God for giving her the opportunity to taste of the heavenly fruit. Afterwards, she sliced the first apple into tiny pieces and ate 1 piece a day for 40 days without eating any other food. During those 40 days, the aroma of precious myrrh filled the saint's mouth and her cell. On Holy Thursday that year, Saint Irene cut the second apple into thin slices and, after liturgy, shared them with the other nuns of the convent. The nuns said that they felt as if they had just tasted heaven itself. It was so sweet and fragrant. They all thanked the Lord for letting them witness this miracle. Saint Irene saved the 3rd apple for the last days of her earthly life. After the saint partook of the 3rd apple, the whole convent was filled with a heavenly fragrance. Although advanced in age, she still looked as though she was a beautiful young woman. Saint Irene fell asleep in the Lord at the age of 102. Throughout her life, Saint Irene fervently prayed to Christ for others. And even though Saint Irene lived over 1,000 years ago, she still continues to perform many miracles even to this day. She has helped many people be healed from various ailments and helped many women have children. Saint Irene is a very beloved saint in Greece. It has become a tradition for Orthodox Christians in Greece and around the world to bring apples to church to be blessed on her feast day. People who do this fast and pray before partaking of the holy apples in times of great need. O all-holy and almighty Trinity, by the mediation of the Theotokos, the archangels Michael and Gabriel, all the heavenly host, our venerable mother Irene Chrysovalantou, help us and deliver us from the contrivances of the devil.